Welcome to This Week in Heresy, Episode 6, 2 Witchy Heretics, with our guest via Skype, Devin Hunter of the Modern Witch Podcast. Hi, Devin. Welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hello, hello.
Hey. So, I wanted to talk to you this week about pagan gender issues, but I think it would be a good idea to tell a little bit about yourself and your path to kind of set the stage.
Sure. Well, my name is Devin Hunter, and I am the head priest for the Sacred Fires tradition of witchcraft. It's also the tradition I founded. I am a trained Dianic witch, and that isn't to be confused with the Z Budapestian feminist Dianic Wicca, because those are two different things. And I have a third degree in Northern Star Wicca as well, and I am a student of the fairy tradition of witchcraft. I'm also a professional witch. That's what I do for a living. I work at a store called the Mystic Dream in Walnut Creek, California, and that's what I do. So I'm constantly helping people with their spirituality and working through things and selling them their magical supplies and all of that kind of good stuff.
Right. So, I remember reading about on Facebook where you're talking about how you have to explain a lot about, you're not that Dianic, those kind of Dianics. What is that like? Because I know I have to explain it to people sometimes in certain circles where it's like, no, there's the Z Budapestian Dianics, and then there's these other Dianics that are different. And, I know it's been hard for me because I don't know a whole lot about your Dianic tradition. So.
Well, there's a reason for that. So one of the things that, period, I think in paganism and witchcraft, secrecy is still one of those things that we hold on to. And I can tell you that Dianics have done really, really, really good with that.
Right.
And the reason being, one of the things I think kind of across the board, because we'll get into the variations of the Dianic tradition here in a second, but one of the things that we all pretty much agree upon is this concept that Diana is a goddess who is a singular force in the universe. So she doesn't need a consort. She didn't need anybody to kind of help make her or create her. So we all agree with that across the board. We are going to approach it from different levels and at different places. So one of the things that I think is really important for everybody, when you hear Dianic witchcraft or you hear the term Dianic witchcraft, it's that's really become a popularized pagan term, and that's pretty recent. And that's something that comes from Z Budapest and her work in feminist Dianic Wicca. Right. And but if we actually look beyond that, Margaret Murray was writing about the Dianic witch cults in her books way before Z Budapest was even walking on Earth. And the idea of Diana as a witch goddess has been around for quite some time. And then we forward ourselves to the works of Leland, and we look at Aradia and things like that. And we have this connotation that Diana is a witch goddess or a witch queen. So my tradition, and actually pretty much all of the traditions that I know of except for Z's line, work with Diana as a witch goddess. And that's really where we focus on things. Now, this also includes, mind you, the work with Lucifer as an emblem of the sun, and then Aradia as kind of a guide or a teacher. And the thing is so this is always, that's the spiel. That's the big spiel we give everyone. But I got to tell you, my students actually had a really interesting experience because I have a lot of students who get involved with other groups, especially here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Right. And one of them had came back from an event with a heathen group. And when she had said, because they were asking, well, where do you come from? What's your thing? And she said, well, I'm a Dianic witch. And the immediate response was, oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
Because of, especially here in the Bay Area, we'll say the feminist Dianic Wicca has been a very, very big thing here. There's a lot of that in our area. And so a lot of people have either really great experiences with that or really, really bad experiences. And it tended to be if you were a male or if you were transgendered, you just weren't getting along with that message. So we find ourselves in that situation a lot. And so I have to explain, no. Z Budapest is actually a separate separatist. So this is something that's really important to know about the Dianic tradition. She is a separatist. What she represents is totally separate from, I would say, the values that the other Dianic traditions tend to have. There's the McFarland Dianics, and they've been around since, forever. I'm going to mess it up probably, but they've been around at least since the 60s, and they are notorious for their secrecy and not coming out. And so when all the crazy Dianic stuff did happen, they were like, they just went away. Like you all of a sudden you started seeing,
just like,
yeah, totally. And you saw like their like the website stuff went away. The website was gone all of a sudden. The Wikipedia entries were gone. They wanted nothing to do with it. I know I had a couple of people say, I tried contacting them to get some support or some answers, and they just wouldn't even respond. So, there's a lot of that. We're witches, So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I thought it was really cool when we started our work at PantheaCon in 2010. We did have some of the other Dianic traditions come up to us with like, listen, we're not all like that, I promise.
Yeah.
And my wife had a really great conversation with a Dianic witch, I think from the McFarland tradition. I don't remember who it was, but they had a really fantastic conversation, and I think they exchanged a couple emails if I remember right. But and they were really, really awesome. And they're like, listen, we're not all that. It's just the Ubiquitous. It's all crazy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So what is that? I guess you are in a goddess tradition, yet, there seems to be these pagan gender roles that, especially with the more traditional type traditions that have a degree system and things like that, women worship a goddess, men worship God, and that's just kind of how the way it is.
Yes. That's oh goodness. Okay, so
yeah, it's the really old school.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I know have come up a lot in my circles as far as what we're talking about right now is this idea that. Oh, because this is one of those. Here I go being a heretic. I'm on the right place. I'm in the right place for this.
Yes.
One of the things we've talked a lot about, especially I have a group called Project Pagan Priest on Facebook, and that's which we can talk all about that if you want to later on.
Oh,
but,
yes.
The idea behind it is that men in paganism can come and kind of talk about some of the issues and some of the things surrounding their masculinity within paganism. And in 1950 or in the 1950s rather, when Wicca was becoming a bigger thing. Obviously, we had a lot going on in the women's lib movement. I don't think this is news for anybody. The women ended up really a lot of the times women were able to align themselves with the pagan movement at the time, and they saw a healthy alternative to spirituality because suddenly, if we move away from a kind of a monotheistic view where God is a man and those types of things, you move into a culture where women are not only venerated but they're also seen as goddesses.
Right.
Of course, that switch is going to happen. But when that happened, there ended up being some imbalances that were created just in the nitty gritty parts of our culture, of our little subculture here.
Right.
People need to remember paganism is not a big movement. It really isn't. At one point, we were growing really fast. Those numbers have dropped off majorly.
Right.
At one point, yes, we were the fastest growing religious movement in the world. That's not the case anymore. So, and there's a lot of reasons for that. There's a whole lot of reasons for that, which that's another show.
That's a whole nother show. And
totally.
Yeah.
But this is one of those reasons, actually, is this idea that you had a lot of people coming to a faith system that totally supports women, absolutely supports the process. I think I've actually never met a pagan who wasn't a feminist, at least, anybody who I invited over to my house or I circled with.
Oh, absolutely.
Those things tend to be, cultural values that we have. Unfortunately, while that was happening and why we were as a culture and community giving attention and energy to that, and I consider myself to be a feminist. There's nothing against feminism. I have no problem with feminism.
Oh, yeah.
What I have a problem with is that while men were being asked to hold space for women so they could find their empowerment within our particular faith system, we were also kind of told to sit down and shut up.
Right.
And this is something that if I bring this up I almost always get jumped on. It's always a priestess who feels like I am trying to say that women are not marginalized in other parts of culture, and it's not got nothing to do with that. I would never in a million years stand in front of a woman and tell her she could not cross a line. I would never I could not be that person. I am not that person. I'm not concerned about the women in our tradition though, because if I look around, I see a lot of really strong women in paganism. I don't think we have a problem with strong women in paganism. I think we do have a problem with strong men in paganism, though. And helping them find their place and helping men in general, if we're going to talk about paganism as being predominantly goddess-oriented, which it is, giving them a role and giving them a place within that where they feel at the very least an equal to the women that are practicing. And this is something that in my history as a pagan, this has been an issue for me many times. Obviously, I was trained in a Dianic coven, which was all women. It wasn't because they were feminist Dianics. It was just because that's just how it happened to work out.
Right.
And just like my students in Sacred Fire, so we have Coven Aradia. That's really our big training coven, and they're all women. So, it's got nothing to do with the gender stuff. It's more about what happened when the gender politics and dynamics were imprinted on the growing generation of modern pagans. And a lot of us aren't comfortable with the gender dynamics. Across the board, it's just there's a lot of messed up things.
Oh, yeah. And it's kind of like the whole, I've seen it in a lot of other groups talking about what it means to be an ally. And I know for me, it also bothers me when you have people who want to support you and yet you're telling them, sit down, shut up, don't talk. Right. And it's just like, well, isn't that kind of missing the point?
Oh, absolutely. And that's something that, it's kind of a hot button for me, to be honest with you.
Right,
it's something
me too.
That I know has been a problem for me in a lot, because as you were just saying, if somebody is wanting your support and they want it unconditional, of course I want somebody's unconditional support if I'm looking for their support. And so I completely understand there's that need there. But at the same time, while, I wrote a piece a while back ago, and in the piece I said, while we were holding space for our sisters so that they could find their empowerment, oftentimes that came at the expense of our own discomfort. And, the immediate response to that was, well, of course, you're functioning in a patriarchal system and da 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 da. No, not at all. That's not. I am very aware of the concepts of patriarchy. I think everyone gets screwed in the patriarchy. Across the men get screwed. I am not the Marlboro man, and because I am not a rich white guy, that's just the way. So we all get screwed. It's not an equal system. Let's move away from that. And I think that's been a lot of the conversation. Is okay. Well, what do we build in the meantime? The big problem we have here is that ultimately there are parts of us in our community, and this is overall paganism, that are functioning with a set of terms that we as a culture have agreed upon, and those terms you can find in the dictionary or in the encyclopedia. And then there are a group of people who are functioning under terms that mainstream and secular society has not caught on to.
Right.
And so I'm one of those mainstream people. I'm a secularist. I think it's really important that pagans are able to speak and live and thrive in a secular world. Yeah. I think if we can't, we have issues. And I think we've seen those issues develop in our communities. This is how we keep people from being afraid of us. This is how we actually educate people, is to try to be, I'm not saying forget your uniqueness, but be a little normal. It's not a bad thing. So one of these words, one of these terms, of course, is matriarchy, and that's come up.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Oh, yes, and if anybody's on my Facebook page, you can see all the horrible talks that have come from this. Oh, yeah. And my point with matriarchy is that ultimately I've seen it work some really, really horrible ways. I was a victim of some of the ways it worked in a bad way. I've seen it also work in some good ways too. So it's absolutely doable. You've got people in the Bloodroot Honey Priestess tribe in Kaya. They do the matriarchy right. If you're going to be a matriarchist, go talk to Rabbit or Yeshe Rabbit. She'll totally hook you up. She'll tell you how it can be. that isn't across the board, though, what
Right.
my message is, and that's not where my spirituality is. I think that one of the things we all have to remember is that we're all coming from this, even though we can all agree, hey, the patriarchy's screwed and these things don't work, we also need to remember that we're all coming to this for very specific reasons, and most of them are very spiritual in nature. So for me, my spirituality and my connection to the goddess is really not about gender. And in fact, one of the things that we really work on in the temple and in sacred fires, which is my spiritual tradition, is that God has no gender. And so we like to use the term like God herself or goddess himself, just because it's a gender fuck, and you can mix those things up. So for me, the divine is genderless. And because the divine is genderless, I have a hard time devoting massive quantities of my time and energy to the concept of gender.
Right.
You know what I mean? I feel like it's kind of a waste of time. And so if we are, kind of approaching our spirituality from that, or we're approaching paganism from that light, a lot of these dynamics go right out the door.
Yeah.
Just across the board. So from that perspective, the idea of patriarchy is completely useless. The idea of matriarchy is completely useless because they're still saying, well, let's say sensitivity is a feminine quality. So that's the, domain of the matriarchy. Well, no, sensitivity is a human quality.
Right.
Just like competition is a male quality. No, competition is a human quality. And we need those things in order for our species to thrive. Right. And so it gets down to, really ultimately, as a pagan, you've come to this wonderful, wild, crazy world that is our community. And it's about what you want to take from it. I may not be a matriarchist, but I can support my friends and my sisters who are. It doesn't mean that we're going to agree on everything. I don't think we should ever agree on everything. I think then we'd have all kinds of issues. But let's all remember here that even though modern paganism, especially witchcraft, is predominantly female, there is still a growing population. There is still a bunch of new people who are going to be coming our way. And it's our job to actually build a future for them that is going to be one of inclusion. I think we see what happens when that doesn't happen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, we have some glaring examples of that.
Oh, yeah.
And, and even my first coven was actually an example of that, because my first coven leader was very much like, okay, this is what straight people are. This is what straight women are. And this is what gay women are. And this is what gay men are. And there was nothing else. Right. And, there was, and it was just pure misogyny on his part. Yeah. And especially towards straight men. Oh, he was so brutal towards straight men, any straight man that came to our coven. And it was just but they're seekers. They're coming to learn. They're coming to become better people. And yet you're just going to keep slapping him down and not letting him grow because you don't happen to like the fact that he's straight.
Right. Well, and it's totally a power thing. I know. And, when I was initiated as a Dianic, I had a woman, because we would do these kind of group initiations. So if there was anybody from any similar tradition or something that was like it, they'd all get together, because these people knew each other for years and years and years. Right. And so everyone would get together and we would all do basically giant initiations. And I had a woman in my initiation actually stand up and say no, because I was a man. Wow. And my high priestess was very quick to say, sit down. This has nothing to do with you. Which I was, hey, how lucky was I? Right. To have somebody like that in my life. But it's still a problem, I mean, and of course that happened. And then I found out the next time around 2 other guys got initiated. It was a beautiful thing, but it's, it's a problem we have. And it's something that, it's so hard to talk about, because nobody wants to sound as though they're against feminism. And this isn't about feminism. I don't have, again, no issues. I have no issues with feminism. And nobody wants to sound as though they're against women. And so it's a very hard thing to say that women in our subculture have really have the energy, they've got the attention, they've got the authority that men don't have. And it's hard to bring that up because, of course, in our secular society, that is totally not the case, Right. And so as we're, kind of talking about what that looks like and, from a spiritual perspective, my concern is, are we actually providing an equal playing field across the board for everybody? Right. Being, a victim of the patriarchy, granted in different ways than a woman is, or even a straight woman or a heterosexual male would be. we're all victims of that. We all see how it gets screwed up. So I'm not saying it's the good term or it's a good system to work with. I if I could burn it, I would.
Right. Me too.
But at the same time, I'm at a point where I really want to make sure that as we are looking at what our future systems could look like, and those things really do develop usually often in a spiritual context, and then they kind of emanate from there. One of the things with sacred fires, which that I've tried very, very hard to do, is to make sure that we are egalitarian. Mm-hmm. We do approach things from a very, very non-gender role. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten called on this. This is kind of interesting. I got called because I referred to mankind instead of humankind in a post, and I totally got jumped on. Well, isn't mankind exclusionary? I was like, well, I wasn't using it to be exclusionary. Mm-hmm. And then said, well, you're an egalitarian, so you should be able to use these different terms. I said, well, you can use whatever term you want to use. That's perfectly fine. But that actually has nothing to do with egalitarianism. See, that's the whole thing, is that, or not feminism, but the matriarchy would come through and say, well, those terms are not, are terms we cannot use. Those are, that's not okay. When in egalitarianism, it's not really about that. It's more about political power. It's more about stations, authority. It's about making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity to come in and to make whatever splash they want to make. It has not a whole lot to do with the way terms are used and things like that. That's up to you as a person. That's up to you as an individual, and how you're going to reflect the values of egalitarianism.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, my tradition, we do make sure that the term, we do use more gender neutral terms. So like we would use humankind because that's the way our tradition rolls, because we have a lot of transgendered people in our tradition and in our covenant especially. And, we want to make sure that the way we're reflecting that is in what we write. Absolutely. It for us, it's been a very important, and like you're saying, approaching deity from a non-gendered role. But the other thing we've been trying to do is to make sure that we don't dilute the idea that there is gender. If there is male, there is female, there's other stuff in between. Mm-hmm. And so, we want to be inclusive of everybody, but we also want to accept everybody's differences. Absolutely. In the way we talk about our tradition. Absolutely. Yeah, there's one of the stories that we hold on to pretty dearly is a story of, Horus and Isis. And little Horus, when he was when he's just a little baby god, goes to Isis and he brings up gender. He says, well, what's the point of this? Do men go to a different afterlife? Do women, are we different species? What is it? And she said, no, none of that actually matters. This is from the words of Isis. None of that actually matters. The afterlife has nothing to do with your sex. And so we really hold on to that as much as we possibly can. Mm-hmm. It's interestingly enough, there are, at least in Covenant Radia, which is like I said, our training covenant, it's pretty big. Right. There are, it's all women. And then in Living Temple of Diana, which is our ecstatic goddess tradition, we do a lot of musical stuff, and it's very fun. It's a really great, wonderful shamanic way of connecting to goddess. But the only reason why there's an equal amount of men and women is because we brought some people in from the outside. So, it's definitely, even our tradition is still female heavy. It's still female oriented in many, many ways. It's always going to be, again, because this is the system we're working with. But the funny thing is my students don't give a flying rat's butt about any of this. Right. We talk a lot about it because I'll bring it up because I'm upset about something, or, I'll see them respond to something on the internet. And I never want my students to be thrown under the bus or, anything like that. So I think I complain about it more than they do. And, I know this last time around, I brought it up and I saw 3 eyes just roll. They're just so done with it. And, this has been years for us of being very public about this and going, working with other groups and going to PantheaCon and going to like the Earth Warriors Festival and other places to really kind of break the mold and to share our stories and our messages with people. But it's been really, really difficult. So I think a lot of them are just burnt out now, to be honest with you, because this is what in this thread of thought, because I would say about a week ago, I posted something about
how matriarchy is not a proper replacement for the patriarchy. And I got my ass burned by some people who I'm really close to and people I just adore, and they're very angry with me, and I can't do anything about that because, we obviously have some issues and some things there to work out. And that just is the way it's going to be, for now.
Right.
But in that, I remember the response I got from some of my students really was, this isn't our work. This isn't what we're supposed to be doing. This isn't what we set ourselves up to be doing. So why do we keep getting brought into this? And in the comments of this thread, there's a wonderful craft elder of mine. I just adore her. Her name is Valerie Walker, and she posts this thing. And she's just very clear. This is nothing new. This argument has been happening for at least 30 years. I see it come up all the time, and nothing ever happens because of it. It's just something people like to get upset about, say their 2 cents on, and then basically walk away, because ultimately we don't have any power to create that level or that degree of change.
Yeah.
She's got a point there.
I agree. And, and I also agreed with your first point too, just swapping out matriarchy for patriarchy doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be better, but, V definitely has a point there too. It's like, this is an old argument. And let's move on. I mean, I've just spent 3 years in academia, so I've been really chewing on these conversations a lot.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I've always felt, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but it just seems like there's a lot of people that are like, we just have to focus on women, and we just have to focus on this, and it's just like, but you can't neglect part of the population because they have power,
right?
Because there's a lot of men that have been hurt, and granted. Statistically, the majority of people who are raped are women. However, there are men who are raped. There are men who suffer abuse. There are men that get spiritually abused. And, to some degree, sometimes I feel like, well, all this talk about feminism, are you throwing men under the bus?
Well, I don't. Here's the thing. I think the beautiful thing about feminism is that it is a battle cry for equality. So I think that it's. I love feminism. I love being a feminist. I love powerful women. I'm a gay man, so of course I love powerful women. I have no issues, but Wonder Woman is on my wall. I love the idea and the concept of a woman taking control. Like, I'm very much so looking forward to having Hillary Clinton as president soon. All of that. I'm thrilled by. I love the priestesses in my life and the people who've guided me, but we end up running into that issue of ultimately falling into old habits and patterns that we inherited from our overculture. We come to pagan, at one point, at least in my life, I don't know about the pagans that are listening to your show now, but at one point, I'd say about 14 years ago, it was cool if you just got to meet another pagan.
Right.
Oh my God, it was the coolest thing. You finally found somebody like you. And
God.
Exactly. And now here we are, 14 years later, and you meet a pagan and do I trust this person? Are they, it's totally different. Now we have a lot more infighting because our community got to a certain point, and, everyone's getting butt sore. Because everyone is getting hurt, you know. I mean, nobody's walking away from these discussions unscathed. I know when I walk away from a discussion and I have actual anger, in my heart for somebody I just love and adore. Well, that's not okay.
Yeah,
that's just not okay. So there's some things in with this that I think. Ultimately, as Valerie Walker said, we're not really going to be able to make any big changes now because it's just not going to happen. What we can do is set ourselves up so that as we're getting this new wave of pagans coming in, and it's going to happen. Yes, we may have stopped growing as fast as we did, but I mean, let's face it, our culture is highly dominated by pop culture.
Well, absolutely.
And so the minute we have a witch show come on, or we have, suddenly we have this influx of people who are interested in what we're doing. So we've got a lot of that going on right now. So I'm sure, if we start to pay attention, we'll have a big influx of people. And what I'm more concerned about, because I was a little boy who was a magical child and wanted to explore that, what I'm more concerned about is making sure that this next generation of witches that are coming into the craft, I'm a witch. That's really what my spirituality is about, witchcraft. Paganism, I dig paganism. I get kind of chalked in with pagans, but I've never really sat down and considered myself to be one of the uber pagans or part of the uber pagan culture in that way, because I'm a witch. I'm much more interested in spells and the occult and things like that than I am ancient goddesses or ancient gods. But that's me. So in that, I'm more concerned about making sure that this new crop of witch has the social skills that they need in order to actually make change and produce change within pagan culture, but also in overculture. And that's not going to happen when all we do is argue and people refuse to believe somebody else's point is valid, when they refuse to hold paradigm. This stuff isn't going to cut it. And if you were in a college class and the debates happened the way that they happen in our pagan community, we would be kicked out of class.
Well, yeah, some of the classes, yes. Some of the classes actually, it was more of like the class was dominated by that point of view. And I could go on and on about how that was. Of course. I think you're right. I think we're going through an evolution, and I think if I remember right, the Alexandrian elders, Gavin Bone and Janet Farrar, they had written about this a while back, about how we are moving into this evolution, and I think you're right. I think we have a responsibility to the younger generation, but I also think our younger generation is really going to be changing a lot of things because they don't know these old arguments as well as we do, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think, and I've seen a lot of the younger pagans, especially younger pagans who have grown up in pagan households, they just have a different attitude towards it. They're like, oh, you believe you're Norse, you're this, you're that. Oh, okay, whatever.
Right. Yeah, we definitely have more of the polytheistic good stuff going on, I think, in the modern times within paganism than we have had in the past. Diversity is definitely more accepted, especially when it comes to the faith base, and that's really because we as a culture really strive to support the idea of independent spirituality, and it's all really wonderful. Because this is a whole, oh my goodness, Gina, I could go on and on and on and on and on. One of the things I think is that's coming up when we talk about the future and how little arguments and even big arguments like we're having about gender, and we've been having about gender for years and years and years now, are actually going to affect things. To me, it's really about making sure that even though we're supporting this idea of an independent spirituality, even though we're supporting the concept that we're all allowed to have our own imaginary friends and, all that, because that's, let's face it, that's what we're doing. I'm allowed to have my imaginary friend. She's a big goddess made of the universe. That's what I worship. And somebody else worships, the gods of mountains. That's totally fine. We're all allowed to have our imaginary friend, as long as we respect the views and the approach of that imaginary friend. And we can do that in alignment with secular culture. Now, I say this because the thing that I keep hearing a lot about is some of the definitions that the pagan community or communities that are aligned with the pagan community are using that aren't actual terms being used, or if they're being used, they're being used differently in secular society. And the reason why this matters is because, if I get interviewed by a TV program and I use terms, because this has happened, and I use terms that in secular society mean something completely different, I'm going to sound like a fool, or I'm going to sound weird, which, hey, I can sound weird. I'm totally okay sounding weird. Yeah. I prefer it. But at the same time, we run into some blocks, and we actually run into creating some bigger issues that the everyday pagan or the everyday person who maybe isn't prepared to answer a bunch of questions and things like that actually ends up having to deal with. Right. And so we have to be very, very aware that even though our individual communities may be using a term in a certain way, that isn't exactly how the term is being used elsewhere. And you can blame the system all you want, but it's still the term that everyone agreed to as a society or a culture. Yeah. And so we have to be really aware of that, if it's in the dictionary and it reads this one particular way, I'm going to use it that way. Other people are going to use it that way. Just like with mankind, well, in the dictionary, mankind is humankind. It's, it's an adjective that just, so it's one of these things that I get a little frustrated over, because I try to make sure that if I say something, everybody's going to understand it bottom line across the board. Because oftentimes the things that I talk, especially I have a show that Modern Witch that is often my audience is not actual paganism, which is
Right.
and people don't get this. My audience is not paganism, although, that's the people who, a lot of pagans listen to my show, and I'm very grateful for that. But the majority of people who I actually get listening to my show are newcomers to the craft.
Right.
Or they are outsiders completely. And because of that, because I approached my show from a life and style perspective.
Right.
And so because of that, like I got picked up by the AV Club and some of these other organizations that are completely not at all religious or have anything to do with religion, but just liked what my show was and what we were doing. And so they would promote it. And so I got a lot of secular support. I got a lot of secular interest. I got a lot of stuff from the outside of paganism. So really, when I'm doing a show, I'm preparing it not to necessarily be heard just by pagans.
Right.
And so I have to be very careful with my terms. I have to be very careful with making sure if I say something or bring a topic up that it's not going to make, it's not going to instantly shut somebody out of the conversation, things like that. And so I have to be really aware of these things. And it amazes me that we'll go into a conversation online or on a forum or something somewhere, and suddenly we're using a different set of terms that don't mean what you think they mean. And then you get mad at the system. Or you get mad at whatever. Just like when pagans say, "Oh, they stole our religions." No, they didn't steal our religion. Our holidays. They didn't steal our holidays. Our holidays evolved. People took them with them. It didn't mean that Christianity stole them. It's the people who came into Christianity took their stuff with them. That's how things evolve.
Exactly.
And it's the same idea here in modern paganism. We have, terms that, again, in things that, again, secular society supports and understands that we in paganism are completely vehemently against. And it makes it very difficult to actually have a civilized conversation amongst ourselves and then actually be able to reflect that dialogue elsewhere in the secular world.
Yeah, I totally agree because, being a multi-faith person plus doing interfaith work as my vocation, it's also been very difficult for me. I gave a presentation at a church that I'm hoping to get space from to do my Between the Worlds Church stuff. And, I had to really specify, okay, this is what my church does. This is how my church defines things. This is how my Wiccan tradition defines things. And I don't speak for all pagans. You might have to do some more research because I cannot speak for every pagan that this is true for them.
Right. Yeah.
And it makes things tricky, and you have to be really, like you said, you have to be really aware of what you're saying and who you're talking to and who your audience is. And, it just gets frustrating when, I know for me, and this might be true for you too, but I know it gets frustrating when people are like, well, I'm not this type of pagan, I'm a polytheist, or I'm a Wiccan, I'm this, I'm that, and you don't represent me. And it's like, well, no, I don't. And I've said that.
Right. Yeah, it's, and this is another reason why you get a lot of this when you're dealing with the greater pagan community. You get a lot more of it than you do if you're just talking about, I'm a witch and this is my thing. It's very, very upsetting to me, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
Because we'll be in the middle of a conversation or something will come up and say, well, you don't represent I don't want to represent everyone. Oh, please don't think that I'm trying to. But I am an educated person, and I know that I can speak to whatever, fact or point that I'm speaking about. And so I'm going to stick to what I know.
Right.
And that doesn't mean I know you, or that doesn't mean I represent you, but it does mean that I know what I'm talking about because I've looked it up, or I've spent time there, and I've done the research, and I maybe even live this aspect of my life in that way. And so those things come up all the time. One word that I think that I love watching be brought up on the internet, because I was once one of these people, and so is warlock.
Oh,
I
Lordy.
love when the word warlock gets brought up because, I was raised Wiccan, or brought into the Wiccan church. And so, I'm very aware that in Wicca, especially Gardner's version of it, warlock means oathbreaker.
Right.
But if you go to the dictionary, if you actually talk to an etymologist, so somebody who actually studies language and words, these people are the authorities on this. If you look over, at etymology and you look at that word, it doesn't at all have the same connotations that it does in paganism. Warlock actually does mean oathbreaker, absolutely, but it meant oathbreaker to the church. It was a Christian term, and then later on, it wasn't ever used to represent what it represented until much later on in history, and even then, secular society never adhered to it. So the word warlock, if you look it up, means male witch. If you go to Scotland, which is where this originated from, for the last 500 years, warlock has meant male witch. It did not mean oathbreaker to a coven. It meant oathbreaker to the church, just like a witch was somebody who denied her vows or denounced her vows to the church, her christening, her those types of things. It means the same thing for a male. So it's really interesting to me to see the word warlock pop up. Now, granted, my boyfriend, one of my boyfriends, he uses, because I'm poly, he uses the term warlock to describe himself. And he has done more research on this than anybody I know. And he'll be the first one to tell you, no, there's no actual proof for this.
Right.
And what comes with this, and this is really the point I want to speak to, is that while people are posting about this, you get a lot of this. Well, if you say, "Oh, warlock," what do you think about the word warlock? You'll get a bunch of comments of people saying, "Well, that person's just stupid. Well, that person just wants to get attention.
Right.
Well, that person, if they want to use that term and show off their ignorance, then by all means, let them do it." It's this condescending, amazing thing to me. And this is what I see every time pagans get into an argument on the internet.
Yeah.
Because it's, first of all, the internet warriors are hysterical to me.
Right.
And I've been sucked into this stuff. I have been one of them, and I now have learned all my lessons. Yeah, it doesn't get us anywhere. It really doesn't. And all it does, I don't want to sound like an asshole when I'm talking to somebody about a point. And if I get upset and it comes out that way, well, I just did myself a disservice. Yeah. And so it's just this kind of stuff. It's the condescending tone. If I like when I posted about gender a couple weeks ago, it was the condescending tone. And I'm like, well, this proves my point of why that type of system or why this wouldn't work out. Listen to the way you're talking to me. Advocate of this, and so it's those types of things that if you're going to make an argument, it doesn't matter how passionate you are or how verified and you feel in your approach to this,
right?
You still have to be able to convince other people that your way is the right way, right? How do you do that? Well, you listen to what they're having to say, or you ask them, well, why would you bring a point up in this way? You actually include them in the dialogue. You don't talk down to them. And in paganism, we have a big problem with this. And this is why we can't really move on and have bigger discussions as a community, because we don't have the value of actually working together towards a point. One of the things my partner, another partner, I have two partners. I've been speaking about them both now. My partner's Chaz, he has this beautiful story about how he went to get coffee one day, and he was waiting in line, and he overheard this church group. They were a Methodist church group, and they had all gotten together because they were doing portfolio planning.
Right.
And the church actually provided, because I guess there was a member or somebody from a fellow congregation or something that had come in, but that person was specifically a financial planner. And the church actually brought that person in to educate the members of the church on how to take care of their pocketbook. Because being able to do that and build a portfolio for yourself meant that you were able to secure a future for your family, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And his whole thing is, how amazing is that a church group would support that? But in paganism, we can't get beyond what you call a goddess.
Right.
And this is why we have a hard time being taken seriously, folks. It's that the things that we're actually putting our energy into ultimately are personal things anyway. What you're going to call your goddess, or how you're going to work with her, or, maybe you're somebody who wants to work with a god and therefore, but you want to work with a god from a different culture, or whatever that's up to y'all. That is up to you.
That's great, right?
Exactly. But can we do something that's actually going to prove, not just, because here's the thing, prove to the world, yes, but also prove to ourselves that we can actually do these things that are going to support the culture as far as it's engaged in secular society or the needs of secular society. Not all of us can just go away and live in a compound somewhere, or not all of us can live in our little home in Idaho somewhere and live off the land. We can't do that. I would love to be able to do that. I can't do that though. And so because of that, I still have to manage a portfolio. I still have to, put energy into my finances and those things. Why are those things always shunned in paganism? And I posted.
I totally agree with you, because like one of my things is that, be on the interfaith side of things. It's like, okay, yes, we pagans are part of the greater society of religious orders and things. And, we need to play well with others. And yes, it's good to work on yourself. It's good to have your own god and goddesses, whatever you want. My thing is that one of my things is that, there's this anger towards Christianity, and it's not undeserved. That's my thing. But, there comes a point where you have to grow up and realize, yes, I was angry about that. And yes, things happened. But now, okay, let's see if we can do more together as a society. And I think that's part of what I'm hearing from you is that, we need to really think more about our place in the greater human world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, we're not, having I guess that's one of the things that has always bugged me about some pagan circles is that we tend to be very insular and think only about the pagan community, and we don't really see the greater world.
Absolutely. Well, and so one of the things that comes up a lot with this, because this is a point, Gina, that I have also very, very much so been working on and trying to pound through with people. You had just said there's a lot of anger towards Christianity, and that it's not. That doesn't go without maybe some deserving there. Yeah. The thing is, I was raised Pentecostal, and we're talking Bible Belt, Holy Rolling Pentecostal. Yep. And I also pagan, because my father is a pagan. Mm-hmm. And so I'd have to go to church and do all the stuff throughout the week. But then, on the summer times, I'd get to go and visit my dad, and he'd tell me all about witchcraft and we'd, all that good stuff. So I got my first deck of cards when I was super young. Wow. And so I was a very blessed guy. But I was brought up, and I was even kicked out of a church, the church I was raised in. I was kicked out of it because I asked too many questions. I asked the right questions, I guess. Is really what it is. So,
very heretical.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And and I was told, this is when I was a teenager, and I was told that I was infecting the youth group, that Satan was in my life, and I was infecting the youth group, and that I was no longer invited to be on church property, and if they caught me, they'd arrest me or they'd call the police. And this is all just because I had some dreams and I was asking questions. And so, I'm very aware of what can happen and all that kind of stuff. But I don't blame Christianity for that. I blame the asshole who was preaching it.
Right.
Just like I don't blame feminine or the matriarchy for the issues that I dealt with as a young pagan man. I blame Z Budapest. Right. And that's what let's just break all that down. It's not necessarily what's behind it. It's the people pushing it. And there's so much hatred for Christianity and paganism. And most of it's because people are raised in that way. And then, they figure out real quick, this isn't for me. They move on or, whatever. Yes, we still have to deal with the social injustices brought by a very pagan or a very Christian society. Yeah. Totally there. But we have to let this shit go. We have to let it go because this topic will dominate every single discussion whenever pagans get together.
Absolutely.
It's like the go-to. It's like Christianity became the whipping boy, and every time we're angry about something, we blame it on Christianity or blame it on the minute. Get over it, people. Yeah. Seriously, get over it, because if you don't get over it, then you're never truly going to be able to make peace with that, which means you're never truly going to be at peace with yourself, which means you're never truly going to be able to do the spiritual things you want to do in your life, A. And B, you're making it hard for the rest of us to actually have a discussion in a multi-faith capacity.
Right. Or to do any kind of work in a multi-faith capacity.
Absolutely.
Because, I remember going to PCON and I went to a session on interfaith. And there's this guy there. He's like, well, we wanted to work with the Christian community, but they wouldn't let it. And this guy went on and was ranting about this Christian community that they tried to do work with. And it's like, well, no wonder they didn't try to do work with you if that's your attitude.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what it all boils down to. The thing is that we cannot go to somebody, just like my whole thing, with my ministry and with the way we approach goddess worship and things like that. I'm very, very into the concept of letting people come to you because they think you have what it takes to be a put together human being. Right. I don't want to go and proselytize my goddess. I don't want to go and proselytize my faith, but I very much so want to be a human being that other people look at and say, hey, that guy has his shit together. How did he do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
How did he do that? I want to go learn that lesson. I'm going to go ask him that question. I'm not going to go and say, hey, I've got this goddess and she's right for you. And this is what I see everywhere in paganism. It's all this, come to my team, come to that. No, stop all of that, because again, we're just making it harder to have an interfaith dialogue, to be able to move on and to have any sort of discussion. And I'm, the whole us being against organized religion thing, because that's a whole thing itself. do not want to have a pope. I don't want any of that stuff. Absolutely not. But I would love some sort of structure for paganism to exist that gives us some tools to work with when it comes to how we're supposed to communicate with each other, some of the shared values and beliefs that we do have. At the very least, we're all animists. Things like that. So being able to discuss those things out. Why do we focus on what we're not and not what we are?
Right.
That's since I started my ministry, this has been the thing that it comes up all the time. And I always harp on it. We're always looking at the other side and saying, well, I'm not that.
Yeah.
We're never looking at ourselves and saying, this is who I am, or this is what I am.
Right. And, and it's like, why reinvent the wheel too? Because, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, they have institutions set up to teach and to produce clergy and produce people who can do the work.
Absolutely.
And, granted, we have some of our own system too, and that's great. But, if we want something more structured, like you're saying, why reinvent the wheel?
Right. Right. Well, and it's because there's such a rejection of their system and those types of things. But here's the thing. It works.
Yeah.
It just, like I said, they've got community, in their church, they've got a group of people that get to go and work on their finances together. You never hear of pagans doing that.
No.
You never, because we don't like money and pagans are always poor, right?
That's
right. Well, no, because
that's a whole episode in itself.
That's the mentality that modern pagans have.
Absolutely.
And those are the things that I want to break down. And those are the things I'm much more interested in getting riled up on, is helping to produce a different type of dialogue when it comes to the things we actually can control. I can't control somebody who's upset over gender politics. I can't help them unless, they want to talk to me about something, and then maybe even then I can't help them, Right. And so what I can do is stay very authentic to who I am.
Right.
And I can definitely be there in that, sort of capacity if somebody does need help or have a question about anything. But ultimately, those types of discussions aren't going to get us anywhere as a culture. Yeah. They're just going to bring up old wounding and those things. If we look at something we see, it actually doesn't work, you have to be willing to say it doesn't work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And not stick to your guns just because that's what your teacher taught you. That's not how witchcraft lives, and that's not how paganism is going to survive. You can't change it from the inside out. You have to change it from the outside in. There's no way we're going to be able to go into the roots of paganism and change the things that already exist. That is never going to happen. But we can start to create new ways and let just by the sheer gravitational force of it all, let things shift in that way. And I think that's what we have to do. So when we have these discussions, we have to be really careful that we're actually bringing up these points so that they're going to go somewhere and there's going to be a reason for them.
Right. And, like I tell a lot of people, it's like we either evolve or we die out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, religious movements all the time are born and die, every day. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we have had quite a meaty discussion, but we are out of time.
Yeah, it happens.
Yes. But I'd like to have you on again if you would like to, because I think we could talk about plenty more.
Oh yes. Anytime.
Excellent. So if people want to have a discussion with you or would like to hear what you do, where can people find you?
You can just go to devinhunter.net, Devin with an I, and you can find out all about me and my show, where I'm touring and teaching. I do a lot of that. And you can go to blackrosewitchcraft.com if you want to find out more about sacred fires and some of the other things that are going on as far as traditional training goes. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on This Week in Heresy. Well, thanks for having me. I'd like to thank Devin for joining us this week. And as always, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes. You can also subscribe to our podcast there via iTunes or the Stitcher app. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.